Hello Year 8, this is Lesson 4, Chapter 4. So first things first, as ever, lay out your book, your title, Animal Farm, Chapter 4. I've put the date at Tuesday the 31st of March for this activity. Okay, so pause the video, make sure you've got that done, and then draw your table ready to make some notes. Your key vocab column this time and key events and quotes is all you need. Just lay out your page for me. Okay, pause the video while you do that and then get ready to read. We are on page 25. By the late summer, the news of what had happened on Animal Farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on neighbouring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of Beasts of England. Okay, so that's your first point on your key events today. On your key events is that news of the rebellion spreads around the neighbourhood thanks to the pigeons. Okay, pause the video, make those notes, then get ready to carry on. Most of this time, Mr. Jones had spent sitting in the tap room, it's like the bar, of the Red Lion in Willingdon, complaining to anyone who had listened to the monstrous injustice he had just suffered at being turned out of his property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. So injustice means unfairness. So that's our first key word today. There's only a couple today. So injustice means unfairness. Pause the video, write that down, and get ready to carry on. The other farmers sympathised in principle, but they did not give him much help at first. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he could not somehow turn Jones's misfortune to his own advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms which had joined Animal Farm were on permanently bad terms. One of them, which was named Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm, much overgrown by woodlands, with all its pastures worn out and its hedges in a disgraceful condition. Its owner, Mr. Pilkington, was an easy-going gentleman farmer who spent most of his time in fishing or hunting, according to the season. The other farm was called Pinchfield, a smaller and better kept. The owner was a Mr. Frederick, a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits, and with a name for driving hard bargains. Okay, perpetually means constantly. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult for them to come to any agreement, even in defence of their own interests. Nevertheless, they were both thoroughly frightened by the rebellion on Animal Farm and very anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. At first they pretended to laugh, to scorn the idea of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. They put it about that the animals on Manor Farm, they insisted on calling it Manor Farm, they would not tolerate the name Animal Farm, were perpetually fighting among themselves and were also rapidly starving to death. So there's that word perpetually again, so perpetually, constantly fighting among themselves. When the time passed and the animals had evidently not starved to death, Frederick and Pilkington changed their tune and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that was now flourishing on Animal Farm. It was given out that the animals there practised cannibalism, tortured one another with red-hot horseshoes, and had their females in common. This was what came of rebelling against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. However, these stories were never fully believed. Rumours of a wonderful farm, where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs, continued to circulate in vague, distorted forms. Okay, so distorted forms, sort of twisted out of shape, misleading. So these stories are a bit misleading, they're a bit bent and twisted. And throughout that year, a wave of rebelliousness ran through the countryside. Bulls, which had always been tractable, suddenly turned savage. So that means like bulls that had been easy to control are now savage, like in The Tempest. Like Caliban is presented as savage, wild and uncontrollable. So they've had a complete change in nature. Sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clover. So they devoured the clover, they consumed it all entirely really quickly. Cows kicked the pale over. Hunters refused their fences and shot their riders onto the other side. Above all, the tune and even the words of Beasts of England were known everywhere. It had spread with astonishing speed. The humans could not contain their rage when they heard this song, though they pretended to think it merely ridiculous. They could not understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to sing such contemptible rubbish. So if something's contemptible, it's really awful. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging on the spot. So a flogging was a beating. And yet the song was irrepressible. Irrepressible means you just can't hold it back. The blackbirds whistled it in the hedges. The pigeons cooed it in the elms. It got into the din of the smithies and the tune of the church bells. And when the human beings listened to it, they secretly trembled, hearing it as a prophecy of their future doom. So prophecy is like a prediction. Okay, next notes to add then. So the humans are worried as animals everywhere are singing Beasts of England. That is your next bullet point to note down. Pause the video, make the notes, and then back to the book. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked, and some of it was already threshed, a flight of pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted in the yard of Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. So if you alight, you come down from the air. So they've flown through the air and then they've come down to land in the farm. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen others from Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5-bar gate and were coming up the cart track that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks, except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun in his hands. Obviously, they were going to attempt to recapture the farm. So they're going to try and take back the farm. Okay, and that's your next point here. So I put the farmers' names in purple because they are new characters to us, but they are minor characters, so we don't really need a whole column for them. So your next point here is that Jones has joined up with those two neighbouring farmers, Pilkington and Frederick, to try and recapture Manor Farm. Okay, pause the video, make the notes, and then get back to the book. This had been expected, and all preparations had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaigns, which he had found in the farmhouse, was in charge of the defensive operations. So Julius Caesar, hopefully some of you will have heard of before, was a Roman emperor, and he was a very, he was quite a widely feared military leader. He was very shrewd, and led lots of very, very successful military campaigns to expand his empire. Okay, so Snowball has been sat in the farmhouse studying this man, studying how he has managed to build such a large, strong empire. He gave his orders quickly, and in a couple of minutes every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm building, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, to the number of 35, flew to and fro over the man's head and dropped their dung on them from mid-air. And while the men were dealing with this, the geese, who had been hiding behind the hedge, rushed over and pecked viciously at the calves of their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishing manoeuvre intended to create a little disorder, and the men easily drove off the geese with their sticks. Snowball now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep, Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and prodded and butted the men from every side, while Benjamin turned round and lashed them all with his small hooves. But once again, the men with their sticks and their hobnailed boots were too strong for them, and suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, there was the signal for retreat, and all the animals turned and fled through the gateway into the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw, as they imagined, their enemies in flight. They rushed after them in disorder. This was just what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were well inside the yard, the 3 horses, the 3 cows and the rest of the pigs, who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed, suddenly emerged in the rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for charge. He himself dashed straight for Jones. Jones saw him coming, raised his gun and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and a sheep dropped dead. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung his 15 stone against Jones's legs. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer, rearing up on his hind legs, striking out with his great iron-shod hooves like a stallion. His very first blow took a stable lad from Foxwood on the skull and stretched him lifeless in the mud. At the sight, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment all of the animals together were chasing them round and round the yard. They were gored, kicked, bitten, trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance on them in his own fashion. So vengeance is like revenge. They're getting revenge on these humans for the years of control and exploitation. Even the cat suddenly leapt off a roof onto the cowman's shoulders and sank her claws into his neck, at which he yelled horribly. At a moment when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush out of the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so, within 5 minutes of their invasion, they were ignominious. They were in ignominious retreat by the same way they had come in, with a flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way. Okay, so ignominious, I can't really say it. Ignominious is public shame. They've been shamed, they've been humiliated really publicly. And what this battle sort of highlights to us is how if you underestimate your adversary, you actually make yourself quite vulnerable. These men think that because they're humans and because they have guns, they can just run into the farm and seize it back, take control. But because the animals are actually working as a team, and because there is a lot of strategizing, they had a plan, and they were persistent, they actually managed to chase off the men who were probably stronger in many ways, other than Boxer, the cart horse. But what the men had that the animals didn't was a gun. But the animals still won. They worked together and they still won. And there is a lesson there about not underestimating your adversaries. All the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his hoof at the stable lad who lay face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. The boy did not stir. "He is dead," said Boxer sorrowfully. "I had no intention of doing that. I forgot I was wearing iron shoes. Who will believe that I did not do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade," cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was still dripping. So sentimentality. I've gone for sadness and tenderness if you're sentimental. I originally went for empathy. It was the wrong word. Tenderness, I think. Sadness and tenderness. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." "But I have no wish to take life, not even human life," repeated Boxer, and his eyes were full of tears. "Where's Molly?" exclaimed someone. Molly, in fact, was missing. For a moment there was great alarm. It was feared that the men might have harmed her in some way, or even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gun had went off. And when the others came back from looking for her, it was to find that the stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had already recovered and made off. Okay, so a couple more notes then. So got that first note that Snowball had been studying Caesar and was ready for attack. He'd actually prepared. And the animals bombard the men and chase them off. So we know that the animals were victorious. During the chaos, a bullet is fired and a sheep is killed. Boxer strikes a stable hand with his hooves and fears that he has killed him. Okay. And fears that he has killed him. So pause the video for a second, get those notes down, and then get ready to read on. The animals had now resembled in the wildest excitement, each recounting his own exploits in battle at the top of his voice. An impromptu celebration of the victory was held immediately. The flag was run up and Beasts of England was sung a number of times, and then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral a hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. So a solemn funeral, a sad and formal funeral. At the graveside, Snowball made a little speech, emphasising the need for all animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm if needed. Okay, a couple more things then. So, got this point here that the stable hand comes to and disappears whilst the animals are looking for Molly. And then how Snowball declares that all animals must be prepared to kill and be killed for the farm. So pause the video and get those notes down. Okay, next we're going to have that word come up again. Unanimous. Unanimous. So we've already looked at that word before, so I've actually left it blank. So write down the word and go back through your notes. Find that word, unanimous. Write down the definition to remind yourself. Okay, pause the video whilst you do that, and then back to that final page of reading. The animals decided unanimously to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred there and then on Snowball and Boxer. So to be conferred is to be given a military honour. It consisted of a brass medal. They were really some old horse brasses which had been found in the harness room, to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. So you can be given a military honour after you've already died, and that's what's happened for the sheep. But one thing I want you to think about, let's go back to that initial chapter. No animal shall wear clothes. And think about the things that the animals claimed were clothes. Those ribbons in Molly's hair, for example. Mane. And do these medals count? Are these medals clothes? Are they a mark of a human? Are they becoming more human? There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was named the Battle of the Cowshed, since that was where the ambush had been sprung. Mr. Jones's gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of cartridges in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff, like a piece of artillery, and to fire it twice a year. Once on October the 12th, the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowshed, and once on Midsummer Day, the anniversary of the rebellion. Okay, so final thing to just be aware of there. The animals now have a weapon. They have a gun. And they're saying they're going to only use it to honour those days that they have victory over the humans. But you just have to think, do you believe that will be the case? Okay, finish off your notes. The final bullet point today. Snowball and Boxer are given medals and there is a funeral for the sheep. Pause the video and get that done. After that, there are a couple of other things on ePraise. You've got your quiz to do and 2 green pen. And then you can make your flashcards or look at the extra links that I will put on to support the lesson. Okay, thank you.